So the mid-season slump is actually towards the middle of February. Your gymnasts come in and their knuckles are dragging on the ground. They look exhausted and they're not making it through routines. All of a sudden, you start to see little injuries starting to creep up, and there's just a lot of fatigue going on. And this happens for a couple of reasons, but the biggest reason is because of improper planning and programming.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the NJ podcast where we talk all things gymnastics. I'm your host, Rebecca Grady, and I'm here with my incredible co-host,
Dr. Ian Kreider.
Rob Axelrod.
All right, coaches, parents, and athletes. Right now, you might be noticing some changes in the gym. Coaches and parents, you might be seeing more fatigue in your athletes. Maybe there's more irritability. You're seeing some of those emotional ups and downs. You might notice more mistakes showing up in skills that used to seem pretty consistent. And athletes, you might be feeling this too. You might start to feel a little bit more sluggish, and skills might be feeling harder than they usually do. And you might not be believing in yourself as much as you did at the beginning of the season. When this starts happening, it can be really easy to jump to this is a motivation problem. Athletes might feel like they're just not trying hard enough, and coaches and parents, that might be running through your mind as well. But in reality, this is actually something very normal. This happens when athletes have been trying to sustain these high levels of physical, mental, and emotional energy for months. So coaches and parents, we're going to try to break down this mid-season slump and try to give you some ideas to help your athletes get through this phase. And athletes, same goes for you. Hopefully we can figure some things out to bring back that motivation and that excitement to do your routines for the rest of season. All right. I heard first about the mid-season slump from Ian. He was talking about it in one of our group texts. So Ian, tell us what this looks like.
Yeah, so the mid-season slump is when right now, actually, towards the middle of February, your gymnasts come in and their knuckles are dragging on the ground. They look exhausted and they're not making it through routines. All of a sudden, you start to see little injuries starting to creep up, and there's just a lot of fatigue going on. And this happens for maybe a couple of reasons, but the biggest reason that this happens is because of improper planning and programming from the like vantage point of the coaches. So I was headed out to a gym out in California that hired me to come out, and they were an extremely well planned gym. Right, I've worked with gyms that literally have zero planning whatsoever. They just kind of come in and say, "What did we do yesterday? So let's do this today," kind of thing. And I've worked with gyms like this that were just extremely well programmed and planned out. They had exactly the assignments that they were going to do for the entire year and hit percentages that they needed to have and all this stuff. Really, really well thought out. And on the plane ride, as I was going over all their lesson planning and looking at things, it just kind of struck me. And I asked the coach when I got there, I was like, "Hey, do you see a bunch of injuries and kind of burnout and fatigue right around like middle of February?" She's like, "Yeah. How'd you know?" And the reason why is because I looked at their programming and they're ramping up to peak at the right time, but they never had any deloading. They never had any breaks. So everything was constantly building, but the gymnasts never had a chance to recover from the build. And so at a certain point in time, their bodies are just going to give up on them. And they're just going to go, "Look, we've been giving it everything we've got. We've been pushing really hard. We can't do anymore." And so that's when I see that mid-February slump happen the most. It also, especially up in kind of the Northeast and probably Northwest as well, when you don't have a bunch of sunlight and you get maybe a little seasonal affective disorder or little light variations of that. Light variations. Anyway, sorry, I cracked myself up.
Yes.
All pun intended there.
And so when you put all this stuff together, yeah, no wonder they are just dragging right now this time of the year. So Rob, have you seen stuff like that happen
Yeah.
in your gym in the past?
So in the past, February seems to be like we start kind of ramping up a little bit because it's usually our travel meets. We don't make that mandatory. It's an optional thing, but we usually get about 20, 25 kids or so that travel, depending where the meet's going to be that we're traveling to. But we kind of use that as a little bit of a motivation. I do really started to notice that in the younger kids, the first, second, third, fourth graders, mid-season like this, like February, we start with like the ankles start hurting, and then one kid's got a little ankle brace, a cheetah cup, and then it's like a Seavers, and then this one, and it's like contagious. And some of them are just in so much pain with their ankles, and they're just kind of growing. So it's like kind of getting towards spring, and the whole thing that Ian touched on is so important too. I mean, this we had so much snow this year. We haven't had it in the longest time. Kids are getting snow days off, like real snow days instead of doing cyber days. And so they're out playing in the snow and they're coming in like face rashed up, with some it's from wipeouts and sledding. But that turns around into their whole habits change, like their sleeping habits change for a week or so with the snow, and then they're outside, and then they're blowing through energy, and all of those things. They contribute a little bit to like I hate to call
Mhm.
it the mid-season slump because right now at Aerials we're starting to ramp back up from our lull. We give them the time to have a lull. We don't try to do too many competitions back to back, maybe one a month or one every couple of weeks. And it's in those couple of down weeks, 2 weeks, 3 weeks in a row, no competition, where we kinda, like, tone it down a little less
Mhm.
routine training, maybe routine training with sprints, back to those instead of full sets, ramp up our tumbling a little bit, do a little bit more tumble track tumbling, work on landings, let them play with some new skills, and all in the same time, we're not getting all the way out of routine mode, like, okay, today it's one routine, or you hit it and you're done, or something like that, on beam. And then other days, we've talked about it before also, my assignment wise, it's 5 routines and we're just going to check our percentages. What skill is it that's giving you the most trouble by tracking it? And I think all of that's really starting to come together. As a coach, after so many years of doing this, I start to go home and think like, "Oh my gosh, we're just not ready." And it's just that each competition is harder and harder, and like, we suck. And like that's what you feel. You don't say that out loud, but you feel it. And I know a lot of our coaches that are listening to this are feeling the same way, or at least I do. And I all of a sudden think like, I can't coach a kip. I can't coach a kip cast handstand. Like I just can't coach bars.
Right.
Like and bars is lacking. But then you hear from 5 or 6 other gyms, your friends around the different states, and they're having the same problems. Some people traveled
Yeah,
over
yeah.
here to this meet. They flew all the way out there this meet, and every kid blew bars. And then some kids we were in a meet all together, and I think 10 clubs or 15 clubs with some level nines out there, and I mean two level nines got over a 9 on bars, and so I didn't feel so bad. But now it's really
Right.
it's starting to come together, so I think, like, our mid-season slump is I expect it, and so or we plan for it, so to speak. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's the key. You gotta
They
plan for
plan
Yeah.
it.
for your slump, and it don't even have to call it a slump, just a mid-season lull where you get them to relax a little bit, tone down a little bit, and the illness thing is really, really killing us this year. We kids are going down for 10 days. We just went to a meet last weekend up in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and I think 6 of our girls scratched, day of or
Yeah,
night before
yeah.
and still haven't been back to the gym. It's been a week. So that's something you can't plan for, except if you're ready for it, then you can have that lull. Okay, the kids were sick. Okay, we'll get back in. We'll just work on some basics. We'll do some more drills. We'll do routine dance throughs so that we keep up with those. We'll do dance throughs with weights on our wrists, dance throughs with weights on our ankles for beam, take out the skills, let them do some individual skill training. And then this way you can ramp easily back up. That's that same old learning curve. There's a plateau and then there's a dip, and then you always pass the next plateau. But I always talk about how far down is your dip and how long do you stay down at the bottom before you start to travel back up, because that's how long it's going to take you to get to the next plateau before you get an increase. So yeah, get back to from the dip to the last plateau and past. And so we talk about that with the kids too. So plan for it.
Yeah. So the plan, when you talk it through, it makes so much sense. But those coaches who have this plan, or maybe they don't have a plan at all, and they hear about, well, we're asking to run dance throughs after people are being sick, or we're, going to go back to basics some. How do you encourage them, help them get through that like panic? Because those coaches who are like, we're not doing routines today, or we're not doing like 50 routines today, those ones that just want to do it every day. Like, what do you have to say to them to help them see this long-term goal versus what might be missing in this moment where they're freaking out?
Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
well, if you
I mean
don't
that
actually
yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Rob.
Well, I just was saying it's like you don't want to just plan for this slump and they were getting sick and they were just going back to dance throughs. And after all of these years, and I mean, I hate to say it, it's gotta be like 38 years I'm coaching now, and I still get that same stress feeling in my own heart, in my own
That
head.
panic.
That's panic, there you go, like, I panic myself, and so if I'm panicking, I have to make sure that they don't know that I'm panicking, or I'll come in and I'll say,
Right.
"Good day or a bad day." We try never to leave on a bad day, right? If there was a bad last event, usually because 'cause they're running out of gas, it's a whole whole 'nother episode, but the last event may be giving someone some trouble, that's the last thing they remember, and so we try not to focus on that, we send them out the door with a positive thought, they have to come up with something that they did that was positive. But for me, I go home and I won't sleep, and I'll just be so stressed out, and I'll be thinking like, "What am I gonna do? What did I do wrong?" And it's nothing that we did wrong, but the panic never goes away, it never gets old, here I am 3 weeks ago, I'm looking to jump off a cliff, so to say. And then I get back in the gym this week and last week, and it's really starting to come together. And then we're going to go down to the Charleston Cup, and hopefully we'll have a really great time and let off a little steam on Friday with the kids and have a big team dinner. I think it's more fun if the coach gets involved and the coach goes to the team dinner and has a little bit of fun with the kids, and then go do the meet. They catch something in town that has nothing to do with gymnastics.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I think it's really hard to call an audible if you didn't have a play to begin with, right? So if you don't have a plan already set out, then it's really hard to deviate from that plan and have some confidence in that. So to give you an example, last season I didn't have to coach a couple of sessions, so instead I sat in the stands and watched, and I went, my girls are really kinda, like, low and flat, like, they weren't really bouncy, and we were at it was, like, January, so we were kind of beginning-ish towards the middle of season, right? And I was like, "Man, we're just everything seems a little slow, it just doesn't seem as bouncy as it should." So, I was able, because I already had our conditioning planned out and I already knew what they were doing, I was able to switch that up to make it more effective and to add a little power stuff to it carefully, because you can definitely overdo it with that stuff. But I was able to add it in carefully, and by the end of season, things had caught up and they were bouncy and they were getting quick again and everything was looking good. And so this season, we've been running through routines, and I have a full 20-week plan for routines, exactly the exact number of routines that the girls should run every single day of practice up until state meets. And I want them to peak there. And you can make it regionals or you can make it nationals or whatever you want. And so I have every day of practice planned out. Well, as I'm looking at them, I'm going to heart, you know what? Endurance looks good now and things are starting to really clean up well. Now I can give them a little bit of an extra break. I can deload even a little bit more than I normally would to let them feel really, really good at this point in time in season. Because I can look at it and go, hey, with the plan that I have, this is where I expect them to be. You know what? Actually, they're kind of up here right now. Fantastic. Now, not that they're killing it at meets or anything like that, right? But just looking at what the plan was supposed to do, it has achieved. And so now I can rearrange things a little bit and go, you know what? This week is a light week for us, but in this time and season, a light week still looks pretty hard because they've built up. Like last week was, man, it was really, really tough. The number of routines they were doing and everything was the highest that we'll do all season long was last week. But things were looking really good and they competed pretty well this past weekend right after that really tough week. So this week being light week, I'm like, hey, let's back way off. We've got 3 more weeks until the next meet. Let's back way off. Let's work some new skills. Let's work some kind of problem areas that they have. But it gives me permission to do those things when I have a plan in place. And if your plan is just routines every day, well, that's not really a plan. It's just it's a lifestyle. It's not
Yeah,
a plan. And
yeah,
so
Right.
we've got to have an actual plan set out with goals that are achievable and measurable. And if you can look at those goals and say, hey, we've accomplished exactly what we've set out to do, then you don't feel so bad backing off when they do come in a little bit tired. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's one
yeah.
way of how to change
Definitely
things up.
definitely having the plan in place so you know what you wanna do is super important, but in the same token, I tell this to everybody. I mean, I remember and I was teaching phys ed, and my first year, it was like every month it was an evaluation, and it was like, 10, there's 10 months in a year. We had 10 different supervisors, well, some of the same supervisors, but like the phys ed supervisor would come in and, you have your lesson plan planned out and you're going along and it flops. So you need to be able to call an audible on the spot. And then, after, your evaluation or they ask you, "Well, how'd it go?" Like, I think my lesson plan failed." And they're like, "Yeah, that was good, but you had a backup, so do you have a backup?"
Mhm.
So that's the other thing is what's your backup? Is you can plan for whatever you want. It doesn't mean it's always gonna go that way. So having a backup helps, calling an audible helps, and sometimes, the kids know what the plan is for the day, and you throw it out the window and like, "You know what? Today we're gonna do team beam, and we set up teams and we'll pick a skill. Okay, all right, back handsprings. There's 3 girls on a team, so you have to get to 11. Right, let's say 4 times 3 here. I didn't make the math team, remember? So 4 times 3 is 12, right? So if you do 9 and nobody can count for more than 3, that doesn't work, right? So you have to have a lower number. You do 8 and nobody can count for more than 3, and then it's 3 against 3, 3 kids against 3 kids. And then you pick the next skill, and then we did one the other day, we did how many beam routines can you make in 30 minutes? And that was fun. They went at it, they attacked it, it was a challenge. And those are the kinds of things that you have to be ready for with your plan.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just throw it
Having
out
those
the window.
backups.
Yeah, we did for
Yeah,
warm up.
and if you're one thing I like to tell coaches, if you're gonna change up what the gymnast expects, never change it up to be something harder.
No,
You
no, no,
can
that's
change
right.
it up to be something easier,
Change up
but
something
never
easy, like,
change it up to be something harder.
our warm up is pretty intense, but the other day we did games for warm up. We did volleyball warm up, then we did softball or whatever you want to call it. It was a stick ball with a gator skin ball, if you know what that is. And the kids had a great time. They're like, okay, that's your warm up. Now you have 7 minutes to do your splits, and we're off to conditioning. And so that lightens things up a little bit too. And that's what I mean by if your plan was, hey, we're gonna, today's a big one, it's make 3 bar routines. That could go really well, or that could take on fall the whole time. Sometimes it's
Right.
sometimes
The
it's
whole practice.
yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes I just want a basic routine, pirouette, toe hand, 2 giants to a double. And okay, now we'll go and we'll do your rear routine. And they'll spend 30 minutes just to do one of those. Like, okay, this is
Yeah.
let's change.
Yeah, I think it's good that you guys pointed out not to make it harder because
Make it harder. Change your plan.
I've been to a number of gyms where coaches, if routines aren't going the way they want, then they think making things harder is going to make them perform better. And
Right.
that's not the case. We've talked about where they are physically mid-season at this time, but we also need to look mentally. Like if you are
Mhm.
a gym that's hammering routines, pay attention to how your gymnasts are focusing during those routines. Because if you watch the little bits, you can see them looking around. They're not even thinking about their skills. You want to make sure that you're purposeful when you're doing it. So you're thinking about what you need to be doing. There's no point in doing a routine or a skill if you're not going to be engaged in it. That's when we can get hurt. So, coach, I want you to just take a step back and be like, well, where is my team mentally at this moment? And that's why a lot of this plan and variability is so important because it gets them excited about stuff. It doesn't become monotonous. Like we want that change and we want to be able to get them to focus on what needs to be done.
Yep.
Yeah, and if you
Yeah,
look
and
at
it's important
if
to point out that stress is stress is stress, and it's all gonna affect our gymnasts the same way, or at least very similarly, especially when it comes to injury. So, the fact that we can control physical stress pretty well, and you're not gonna control your gymnast going and, like, doing a 20-mile bike ride or something on the weekend with mom and dad or right? But and we can control physical stress in the gym pretty well, so make sure that's planned out and then be ready to go to plan B or plan C when you see that emotional or mental stress or something is getting too high because they're at just a great of a risk of injury when their emotional and mental stress is high as when their physical stress is high.
Yeah, especially if it's both on the same day, right? It's a hard
Yes.
physical day, and
Yes.
and you know it's gonna be stressful for them, but they're struggling, and you don't know what they're struggling about. Maybe it was school,
Hmm.
a fight with mom, maybe it was a bad grade, maybe it was a fight with a friend, whatever. But most of that kinda stuff, we hear the big stuff from the parents, "Hey, we lost a family member or a grandparent, and so we know to help out in those situations." But sometimes when their mental stress is hard for them outside the gym, the best place for them to deal with that mental stress is in the gym because they're doing physical abilities type of routine work or just workout in general or conditioning, and it kind of takes their mind off of whatever the mental stress was. Sometimes they carry it with them. So it comes right
Mm,
back down to know your athlete.
Yeah.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I know with mental stress, a lot of times our gymnasts don't realize that when they're just going through the motions, their skills probably aren't going to be turning out the way they want to. They might be losing that consistency and they may not know why it's happening.
Mhm,
Then they turn it on themselves a lot of the times and think they're just not a good gymnast. I just can't do this anymore. Instead of realizing it might because they're not putting the same amount of focus in to the routines and skills that they were doing at the beginning of season. Our gymnasts a lot of times aren't going to think rationally about what's going on and be like, oh, it's because I'm not actually thinking about the skill and doing keywords. They're going to just place it onto who they are as a person. And then that's where anxiety starts to come in, mid seasons start to happen because they start to put all this pressure on themselves about not being good enough and they don't know why it's happening. So,
mhm.
talking to them about that stuff is so helpful and critical when it comes to maintaining their mental stability and emotional stability as they're going through this season.
Yeah, and I second the notion on take a look at your littles. You know, when you get to the meet, if they're at the meet, they can't even focus at the meet. They're just like spent.
Yeah.
If they're doing that in the gym and then they're doing that at the meet, you have to come back and regroup somehow and get a little bit more focus going with them. So you're gonna have to come up with a little bit of deload, like Ian was talking about. Throw a couple of little things in there. Don't deviate so far away from your plan that you can't reel them back in though. So be careful of that.
Yeah, something important to realize when you start to do deloading weeks, if you haven't done that already, something weird is gonna happen that you don't realize until you see it happen a few times. So, and I've had to tell my gymnasts about this, right? So they know that it's light week and they come in on Monday and Tuesday and they're like, man, I am so exhausted still. I'm like, yeah, this happens every time we do a late week because you're still exhausted from the last 3 weeks of loading, loading, loading. That Monday, Tuesday, you come in and you feel pretty exhausted and you're still pretty fatigued. But by the time Saturday rolls around, and I told my gymnast this, I was like, by the time Saturday rolls around, I actually have to pull you guys back a little bit because it's still light week and you guys are wanting to push
Want to
really
push
hard because you
hard,
feel
yeah.
good again.
Yeah.
Right. And I have to actually like slow things down. And I don't know if you guys noticed this, but we actually sit and like talk before we start vault sometimes. So
Yeah.
that way you guys can't take as many turns. And so I do things purposefully to slow them down once they start feeling better. But those first couple of days of light week, they don't feel good yet. But by the end of light week, they do feel good. And that's why I do a deloading week. I don't do a deloading day. I do a deloading
Whole week.
week
Yeah.
because they need the whole week to recover.
And that's
Yeah.
kinda where I'm at, like, this week was a kind of a deload for everybody except the kids that are traveling this weekend for the
Yeah.
travel. And I was gonna say also a nice way sometimes to deload is to just have a chat at your event. Sometimes kids are banging out vaults and they're doing such a great job, and then I stop them and we talk, and it takes like a 10-minute little chit chat, but they don't realize I'm doing it to slow them down, and they just
Yes.
they're like,
Yeah.
"Oh."
Mhm.
And there's a point and a purpose to it, and you have to know that you're doing that. Like, it's like the kid who's struggling when you chit chat with them a little bit, it's just to calm them down a little and then let them go back and take another turn. I always go back to beam, you know, if it's fall, don't finish, and they fall on the same skill, like say it's their flight series, and it's so they mount a little dance and then flight series and fall, and then they get down, mount a little dance and flight series and fall, and you know they do that 6 times. Well, at some point you have to get through the rest of the routine, so you have to take that into consideration also. Or hey, why don't you do your whole routine this time and leave your flight series out? We'll go back later. We'll work on some flight series. Like, so be ready to make some alters in your loading weeks and your deloading weeks.
Yeah. Yeah. Being super strict on numbers isn't helpful most of the time. Right. And you've got to have some leniency. Now, you need to have standards, of course, and you need to have things that the gymnasts know they need to get done because they need to feel confident when they step out onto the actual
Yeah,
competition floor.
yeah.
Mhm.
But being the coach that goes, "You're staying on beam until you get 10 routines done today," is it's just not the way that you wanna be.
Yeah, and I noticed this year.
Maybe you'll get results, maybe you won't, but you're gonna kill some
Yeah, I
kids. Not
noticed this
literally,
is the
hopefully.
first time I've heard, like, kids say that I fixate on numbers, and I really don't fixate on numbers. Like, the numbers that we come
Yeah.
up with numbers are for a reason. Like, I'll give you for example, and, I'm a little older. When we used to go to a meet, we would go and we would warm up all 4 events, and then you would go and you would do a 30-second touch, and then you would compete that event, right? So if you warmed up vault, bars, beam, floor, that means you were starting on floor. You go, you do your march in, you come out, you get a 30-second touch per kid, and then you do a floor routine. So on bars, in warm-ups, I'd like you to finish a full bar routine, and then there's a one touch, swing a full bar routine, and then there's competition, swing a full bar routine. That's 3. So that's where I get my numbers from. So, like, even though it's not like that anymore, it's kinda like you go to your event, you warm up, try to get through a full bar routine in your warm up, take your break, take your rest, wait for the judges, do your routine, that's 2. But so that if you're doing 3 in the gym, two's easy. If you're doing 4 in the gym,
Mhm.
two's real easy. If you're making 1 floor routine and then you get to the meet and you warm up, 3 double pikes and 2 double tucks, and, in the gym, you only had to do 1 floor routine, so you warmed up 1 double tuck and 1 double pike, and you did a routine. So but you did 5 double tucks and double pikes at the meet. It gets a little bit
Yep,
crazy, but
and
the
I get
numbers
that
that we
question
come up
from gymnasts all the
absolutely.
time with my plan. Yeah, because 'cause I'll
Why do
have
we
them
have this
do 2
number?
floor routines, or I'll have them do 5 bar routines or whatever it is, like, "Oh, why do we have to do so many?" I'm like, "So that way 1 is really,
1
really
is
easy."
really easy.
Hmm.
Well,
Yeah,
that's like
Like,
building up that endurance.
I want you to get to state meet and you just go, "Oh, it's just a 1 on 4 today? Like, I
yeah,
just have 1 routine on 4
yeah.
events today? No
Well,
problem.
yeah,
I
that's
got
like
Yeah.
this."
today. A lot of us are traveling later today or early tomorrow morning. So like my day group's coming in here today and like they're just gonna touch and go and hit your routine and get out. And if you don't hit your routine, you're not gonna stay behind and not gonna do extras today. We're just gonna take our training,
Try. Yeah, do your
touch,
best and move
touch
on.
and go and get out. But it's gonna be a hard week. When we come back from the travel, it's like, do you back off? Like, well, you can't back off, right? Because you have, meets coming up and you wanna stay in shape and you wanna stay in your season, and that brings me to this, when you're in this lull of a thing, well, gymnastics is done for the weekend and they don't have a meet, I remind them that they have to eat and sleep and keep their same regimen, so to speak, to keep their schedule. Like if you're going to sleep till 2 o'clock in the afternoon and you miss 2 meals, like that's not good for an athlete. You have to keep your fuel source up. You have to keep your energy up, and you don't want to over rest your body either, because then Monday's going to roll around and they come dragging in here. It's like unbelievable.
Yeah. Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely.
All right, I'm thinking that we should share one thing that we think could either help coaches or athletes or even parents, I guess if you have something in your mind on helping them get through this time period with patience, because I know that can be very difficult. We're just kind of wanting to push through. So what do you guys have? What pops up quick for you of what you're wanting to share?
Yeah, if you're already in the slump and you went, "Oh, no, my planning didn't work this year," or "I didn't plan at all," and now we're in the slump, you've got to back off. Pushing harder is not gonna help. You've got to back off, and likely you're gonna have to back off for 2 weeks because if they're already in the slump, they basically have a physiological problem called overtraining. It's not overuse injury. It's not that catch-all term, but overtraining, meaning their body literally can't keep up with the workload that's being placed on it. And so it probably is going to take about 2 weeks for their body to catch up and recover if they've been pushing that hard at this point. So hopefully that works out for your season. If it doesn't work out for your meets and your season and your numbers that you want, man, it's usually I say too bad. They need some deloading. They
Yeah.
need a break anyway. Because it's either give a break now or their bodies will force a break later when they get hurt. So let's give them a break now. And then next year, make sure you plan out some deloading. So that way you really hopefully never hit a true slump like you did this year. So for me, every fourth week is deloading. It doesn't matter what meet is coming up. It doesn't matter what anything is. Every fourth week is deloading. So that way we hopefully never hit that slump. And so far, it's worked pretty well. So it's worked well for us. Probably not a bad idea to start implementing.
Yeah, recipe for success has taken a long time for me to get that put into action every year and have it be successful. And I always like to say, like, we've never really failed ever. in the last, 10 or 15 years, have faith in your plan. It will come together. But that's the one thing I can tell you that I think during this whole deloading is do some challenges, do some fun thing challenges that still do gymnastics, but it gives the kids
Mhm.
something else to think about, team them up, pair them up. You know, I don't like the reward system, but, like, on the day that we did, I don't know what these things are, maybe you all people know what they are. They're called the mystery dumplings. Have you seen those or heard about those? Comes in a box,
Uh-uh.
and it's like a stress type of ball that the kids like, and inside is, like, a different colored looks like a little dumpling, and, like, the glitter ones are the ones everybody's after, but you don't know what's in it because it's in a box and you don't know what color it is. So, anyway, we were talking about them, and on the day we did see how many beam routines you can do in 30 minutes. If you make 6 or more, you get a dumpling. And then there's these other things called Nitos. You know what those are? They're the mold.
And
I
I'm
was
out of the
like,
loop.
I
Holy
know, that's what
moly.
I was just thinking
It's
too.
it's a moldable cube with, like it's like putty,
Okay, yeah, yeah. I've
but
seen
and it
those, yeah.
comes
Okay.
in a square. And so those are really popular. So I said, okay, so whoever gets the most of the day in the 30-minute gets 2 prizes. And if you get to 6, but it kind of backfired a little bit because, some kids got 5. They're like, "But I really wanted that dumpling." I'm like, "Okay, well, on the next challenge, when you get to the 6, the number
Right.
was 6."
I know it's so
Right.
hard when they're
Some
close.
sometimes when you're close and you don't make it, but I like those, so I think if it's one thing you could throw in there, it's not an everyday thing. I don't like to do gymnastics for prizes or rewards. The reward itself is doing gymnastics and doing it well to competition, but everybody likes a little gold star.
It's kind of nice sometimes. Yeah. And I guess the last thing I would say is for coaches, if you have been pushing a lot and you've been focusing on routines, you might also be over focusing on mistakes. So taking a step back on the amount of corrections you're giving, and a different way of going about it is trying to get your athlete to find something that they did well every time, or having them, if they tell you a correction, how do they fix that correction? So we're focusing on one thing at a time or something that they did well. And then for athletes, if you're feeling like you are unmotivated, that you've been feeling all of these things that we've been talking about, I would say finding one thing in each skill that you're doing to focus on. Make sure that you are actually focusing on your skill when you're doing it and that you're present, because a lot of times our brain is somewhere else and it doesn't need to be in that moment.
Mhm.
Um, so, coaches, if you have anything that you've been doing that's been helping and preventing kind of this mid-season slump, please reach out and let us know. We'd love to hear from you. If you've tried any of the ideas that we are giving out there to help you, let us know how they go. And thank you for joining us here at the NGA podcast. And until next time, stay happy, healthy, and high performing.